Hello, beautiful beings, and welcome to Wild Divine Awakenings, where we explore all things wild, all things sacred, and all things divine. Today, I wanted to share with you a little bit about my journey and my expertise and my studies and my travels and all of the adventures that brought me to where I am today. So I'm going to share with you what things were like what happened, and what it's like now. And so as a little girl, I was always quite enamored by life, by the cosmos, by the stars, by the moon. I was considered a very airy fairy, that my head was always in the clouds, that I was always just kind of in and out of fantasy. I was a nature kid. My dad was really into astronomy and he was a math teacher. We really shared a love for music and a lot of really interesting music, a lot of instrumental and experimental music. So we had that together. I was a deep dream weaver. I spent a lot of time exploring my dreams in my waking moments. I wrote fantasy stories, romance stories, just always such a seeker of truth and also of romanticizing just life and love. I love Disney movies. I still love Disney movies. Just because I love the storylines. I love the magic. I really loved magic. I loved the fairy realms. I was really, really into books and reading. And anyhow, so this was just like who I was as a child, in my innocence, in my truth, in my authenticity. And there was a lot of early childhood pain that was quite repressed, that I had not acknowledged. And this energetically set me up for more and more of the same going forward through my life. So by the time I was, finished high school, I had internalized a shit ton of shame, of pain. I coped through addiction, through alcohol, through drugs. This is like the sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I just simply wanted to escape it, to be honest. And so I began traveling. And that really lit me up because I was always fascinated by ancient cultures and food and languages and landscapes. And that just really, really just made me glow. I sparkled at the thought of it, the talk of it, the adventures that came with that. And so I decided to study travel and tourism as a way to just, be in that world more regularly. I fantasized about working for Gap Adventures and, going on these big, exciting journeys and taking other people along with me. So I studied travel and tourism, and then I loved the program, hated the work. I was like, I never, ever want to do this. So I didn't. And I ended up taking an ESL course so that I could teach English as a second language wherever I decided I wanted to go. So my first stop was Thailand, and I lived in Thailand, taught English as a second language, was very deeply in my addictions, but also very deeply in my spirituality, and was visiting temples and learning Buddhism and studying the language. And I just, it was again, just walking between two worlds all the time. If it wasn't my waking life and my dream life, it was my addictions and then my spirituality. And I was always quite a lone wolf. I loved to travel on my own. I just loved my freedom. I love my freedom to this day. And so from there, I traveled to different countries. I went on some different adventures. I worked for a couple tourism companies for spring break parties. And so I really, again, straddled these two kinds of worlds. And I came back to Toronto, and I was in the club scene, bartending, working at restaurants, fine dining. And I ended up at this one beautiful high-end fine dining restaurant in Yorkville, Toronto. So I was in this relationship. I was so in love with this person, bordering on obsession. We had this very toxic relationship, but we both just couldn't give each other up. And so I was schmoozing with celebrities by night into the early mornings, drinking the best wine, the best scotch, the best drugs, just the best time. Or so it appeared. But inside, I was crumbling. I was just in so much inner turmoil with this collected pain ever since I was a child that had just been building and building and building. And I was expressing this out in the way I was living my life. So again, by all appearances, it looked like I, was living the dream, but it was anything but. And I was, quite... Okay, there's like lots of trigger warnings in here, but I was quite, there was a lot of suicidal ideation in my life for years and years and years. And at this point, the relationship was really breaking me down in every possible way. And I knew that I needed to heal. And so I had a moment of realization where I was like, I need to leave this relationship. I need to get help. And I decided to enter into a 21-day treatment center for women. And it was one of the very best decisions I had ever made. And so while I was at this treatment center, I met incredible women. I learned so much about myself, so much about, I want to say, the root cause of my addiction, but I really didn't. I understood that it was escape and I was escaping my life. And that was enough. That was enough to know, to get myself into a better place where I could make better decisions and start to heal, like start the healing journey. And so one day when I was out for lunch, we were allowed to leave the facility and just wander around downtown Toronto. And I was sitting in this little church courtyard, and I was just having these moments of reflection. And I had had a lot of divine intervention up until that point, which I didn't make big deals about because it was just something I knew to be true for my experience. There's my little transmuter. And so in that moment of reflection and tapping into my, just my heart, literally the clouds parted in the sky and the sun just was beaming out from behind these clouds, shining down into me, is what it felt like, directly at me, with the message of, you must teach yoga. That was it. This very clear message from the divine. To me, it is God. And I was like, oh, wow, okay. And so from that moment on, I was very clear about the next few steps of my life. And that would be to find a yoga program to study and take that path. And I had always been like a little gym rat in high school. I often went very high to the gym and worked out and, but I had never really done yoga except for my times in on my travels where I would visit temples and churches and synagogues. Like I was always very much into religious places, sacred sites. And so I went back to the restaurant so I could earn all the amazing money I had been making so I could fund my studies, which is what I did. So it wasn't the best idea to go back into that environment with so much vulnerability around my sobriety and just my, my healing journey. The environment was just not conducive to healing. But I went back. I stayed sober for quite a long time. I made all the money and I began my studies. And my first program, which was my initiation into tantric studies, was also in Kundalini yoga. So it was a 500-hour program that was extremely rigorous, that ended up taking me 2 years to finish. And I had another stint at rehab in between that time. And the program was just like, we were doing sadhana, which is daily spiritual practices. It was our spiritual discipline. So we were up at 4 a.m. most mornings. We were doing all kinds of incredible practices, chanting mantras, learning about the body and the energy systems. And Kundalini specifically is, quite the technology. And one of the yogis, one of the teachers was just ruthless. He was like a tough love teacher that wanted to break you down to build you up. And that was not the way I wanted to be approached, but it motivated me in such a way, because there was no way in hell this man was going to bully me out of this program and out of finishing it. So I had so much resilience. We have so much resilience in our life. And the fact that you are still here breathing, listening to this and moving forward in your life at any capacity is a testament to your resilience and to your strength just by being here. So there's the friendly reminder for you when you feel like sometimes you can't go on or that you don't have the strength. So 40 people had begun this program, and only 9 of us ended up graduating. And I was one of those 9. And I was so proud of myself because it was intense. And there were times I didn't think I was going to make it, not just because of the program, but because of what I was navigating in my own life and my own truths, which I was quite closed off to a lot of them, until some years later. And I was still using cannabis quite regularly. And we would call it the marijuana maintenance program. And this is what we coined it in AA or CA or NA, that a lot of people were just doing this like maintenance program, because it was pretty friendly. Like cannabis was a pretty friendly, kind spirited plant. So after I finished these studies, I wanted to go deeper into addiction study and to see how all the things I had learned could be applied to healing addiction. And so I went off to India to do a yoga therapy program at a gurukul, which is a place where the teachers and students live and study together. And so the yoga therapy in India was a lot different than what you see here in the West. So in India, it was a lot about pathology of disease. We studied Ayurveda, which is the sister science of yoga, and how we could apply the knowledge of the elements in the body, and using the chakra system, the meridians, using herbs, using the rhythms and cycles of nature to approach the body, to approach healing. And it was incredible. The program was rooted in Hatha yoga. And again, all of these purification practices, and again, very early mornings, like a sadhana, our spiritual practices was very, very, again, rigorous, not for the faint of heart. And we had the opportunity to work in a local hospital using these Ayurvedic approaches and these other purification practices to support the healing of disease and healing of the bones and the body. And it was so cool because every Sunday we had the day off and we would go into the town and we would drink chai tea, like we were, being bad by drinking caffeine. We were eating spicy food, and all the foods that we weren't allowed to eat during our program. So a lot of these spices were very activating and stimulating for the senses, which essentially would take you away from deep meditative sattvic or purification, like living in purity. So living in balance, really calm body, calm mind. So this was incredible. After these studies, I was like, yes. I went and traveled in the interior of India with a bunch of other girls, went to visit sacred sites. And then I flew down to Kerala, to Trivandrum, to study Shivananda Yoga. So another month of studies that was, again, rooted in Hatha Yoga, but also very specific sequence of postures, along with ritual and ceremony and deep meditation. And I just loved this program. I loved the surroundings of where I was. It was tropical and beautiful. And at this time, I was really opening back up to my siddhis, or we call our gifts. We could look at them as like our sixth senses. And I was having a lot of visions. I was so clear and so pure. My energy was just so open. So I was receiving a lot of information through my dreams, which is how I do most of my work as far as, channeling. And I was very open to some very deep, dense, shadowy knowledge and information and visions. And it became quite disturbing because of what I was tapped into. And it was something that I had to end up getting counsel around because I wasn't sure what to do with it. So I wasn't ready. I just didn't have the capacity to really open up into that space. I knew I had a lot of healing to do. I mean, reflecting back, I didn't know how much healing I had to do, but I knew that I needed to, turn my attention inward and really be in the body and do this work. So after I finished my studies in India, I traveled a bit more. I traveled down to Ecuador for several months and came back to hone my studies into deeper addiction work. So I found my teacher, Satdaram Kaur, who's a naturopathic doctor, and she had created a program called, it was Yoga Therapy for Addiction Recovery. And I started my studies with her. And we all know and love, I think for the most part, Gabor Mate, who co-authored this program with her. So I got to study alongside these two and really deepen my knowledge about, again, the pathology of addiction in the mind, in the brain, and how that, works, but even more deeply into the energy bodies, into the organs, the different chakra centers, and the addictions that come through the core wounds in each of these areas. And it was just so specific and so incredible. There was a lot of merging of Eastern philosophy and Western science. And just, I love the integration of spirituality and science, because it's just, they both play such a significant role in understanding, how our spiritual human experience is. And so, I was also really struggling with the fact that I was still on the marijuana maintenance program. Whenever I would let go of cannabis in my life, this is when I really opened up into my dream realms again and into these visions. And so, like I said, they were so intense that I just had to shut it down. Again, I didn't realize that's what I was doing, but it provided me just some containment in my own experience so that I could just kind of numb out and just do the stuff. So just do life. And so I felt a lot of shame about it, but I was also not willing to give it up. So I didn't. And I was just so excited to begin sharing this work. And so after this, I don't even know how long the program was, like 6 months or something like that, maybe a year, I ended up working at CAMH, so the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. And I was working in the mood and anxiety clinic, teaching workshops. And I also got to do a 16-week program with the Youth Concurrent Disorder Program. So that was incredible to work with these youth. They were such amazingly tuned in kids. And I get it. I get that addiction and mental health overlaps with what the shamanic traditions would see as like gifts, just the ability to move into the unseen realms. And so just the conversations with these kids, the way they viewed life, what they could articulate, their art, the expression of their emotions through art, through creativity was just like so inspiring to me. And then from there, I went to Western Hospital to teach at a women's addiction program. So I pitched a program that the hospital ended up funding, which was just so great because I was always looking for grant money to be able to fund these programs so I could teach for free. It was so meaningful for me to volunteer. And I didn't value my own time at that time because I didn't care. I just wanted to spread the goodness. And so this was a fully funded program. I got 100% of the money. And I also learned how to do auricular acupuncture at that time. So that is 5 points in the ears that was becoming really well studied at that time to support PTSD, addiction, anxiety, depression, just mental health. And this was being used for trauma and PTSD in natural disaster relief in all kinds of different countries. Again, like super fascinating stuff. So I got to needle women's ears and teach this program. And again, just loved it. I got to share my experiences. I could really relate to these women and what they were going through. And also feel like, I was doing so much good in this world. And then from there, I was working in children's aid at another youth program where I got to share, again, all of my lived experiences and my studies. And these youth challenged me. So this was a program for kids who could not finish high school for a variety of reasons. There was pregnancy, incarceration, addiction, mental health. And this program was just so nurturing to these kids. They were so accepting of the way they lived their lives. They provided food and shelter and education. And so I got to be a part of that for a few years. And then I got pregnant with my daughter. And once I got pregnant with my daughter, I kind of pulled back on all the work I was doing because I was doing a lot of work too, volunteering in the homeless communities, teaching this addiction program, which I also really loved. So I just pulled back my energy, started to nurture my body, really wanted to be a calm environment internally for my baby and externally, and started to study prenatal yoga to teach. So while I was pregnant, I was teaching prenatal yoga. And when my daughter was born, I was teaching baby and mom yoga and teaching family yoga. And as my daughter grew, so did my scope of teaching and studies. I went on to study children's yoga, which was so much fun. I did that for a lot of years. It was the most energy expenditure I've ever put out into the world is with kids. And I sucked at reining them in. I could not contain these children. Also, same thing happened in Thailand when I was teaching kids. I'm like, I just want to be the fun aunt. And so again, boundaries, that's, been a big learning curve for me. So, and I was also teaching private clients, and then I would run some women's groups in my home, and just always a little bit of everything. But all of it was being led by what was happening in my life at any given moment. So that was always fueling my work and how I earned a living. And I kept my daughter close to me all the time and never had to pay for childcare. And she would never go to childcare because she was attached to me like a little sweet Velcroed barnacle to my body always, until later. And now, now she's 14. So when my daughter was about 3, I became a solo mama and found a new place for us to live. And right at that time, I was so afraid of being on my own financially and energetically. And how am I going to raise this kid? And in the ways that I want. So I was determined to live off the land, and we were traveling, her and I, down to Ecuador pretty regularly. She was like on this, I had a backpack on my back. I had her strapped into a little baby holder on my front, and off we would go adventuring to find, I wanted to find some land. My dream was to open up this retreat center. And right when I'd moved out, I had gotten this incredible offer by this family to teach them, the entire family, yoga and these healing modalities. And financially, it was like the greatest gift I could have ever imagined, because it just set me up for quite a while. These people are still, wonderful friends today. It's my daughter's very bestie to the max. And so the offer from them at the end of our little stint was, we want to support your dreams. And this is what, had me going to Ecuador and trying to find land to create this retreat center. And as the universe does, it will always take you where you need to go, not where you want to go, in order for your best and highest good and growth. So it didn't work out. That's okay. We ended up moving back to my hometown, where I am now and where Wild Divine Sanctuary is. So at this time, my dream was to have a normal life. I wanted stability and security, because I thought that was what would bring me peace and normalcy to me and my daughter. And so I entered this relationship, which again ended up becoming very, very toxic and ended quite abruptly. But regardless, I bought this house. And my friends supported this purchase, the same friends who I just shared about. So again, so fucking grateful to the people in my life, always showing up endlessly with so much love and so much support. And so once I moved here, I knew I had come back here to do the healing. Whatever that was going to look like, I was like, bring it on. And the other reason I came back here was because I had started a business here in the summers called Sup. And it was a stand-up paddleboarding business that was rooted in mindfulness. The Discovery Channel, this is when paddleboarding first came out. So the Discovery Channel came down and did a little show with me. Global News came down. I was written up and featured in En Route magazine, the Air Canada magazine. It was just so cool. I was doing so many cool things, but I did not know how I had the energy to do all of this stuff. Like, I was totally in flight or fight the entire time, masking as like, everything's amazing. I was pretty much sober. But again, I was using cannabis really regularly, but I was still moving around with a lot of shame and guilt around it, because I just wanted to be the perfect woman, the perfect yogini, the perfect mom, just the perfect example of the feminine. And like, that's just not who I am. It never has been. And like, perfection in all of the imperfection, like I can own that. I love it. I was very much a dark feminine and a light feminine to the rest of the world. So at that point, I was like really struggling to let cannabis go, and I couldn't. And I needed to decide either to eliminate it completely, however I was going to do that, because I've been quitting for years, or embrace it, accept it, learn how to work with it intentionally, and weave it into my practices and into my offerings with others. And that's what I did. I studied a cannabis education program, and I started serving cannabis as a way to tap into our emotional landscape very, very intentionally. So I would work with people who were longtime cannabis users, but had never worked with it in that way, and introduced new users in how we could access, the more subtle layers of our being through our breath and sound and movement alongside this very gentle, compassionate, feminine, spirited plant. So that's what I did. And that is where Cannablist was born, which I still use to this day. It's a hit with a lot of my clients in festival settings. And the irony is that once I really accepted cannabis into my life, it no longer had its grips on me, and I rarely use it anymore for myself. I do sometimes medicinally, because I do find, again, it is medicine. But anyhow, so at this time, there was something really brewing underneath the surface. And all of a sudden I had all kinds of these like childhood memories. Things began to resurface, and I really started to witness myself becoming destabilized. My psyche was becoming quite fragmented, and I was watching myself silently inside, being like, what the fuck is going on inside of me? I was terrified because I was witnessing my behaviors, like the impulsivity, the recklessness, this wildness, like really kind of unhinged, and really trying to contain it. This is when I received an ADHD diagnosis, which helped my entire life, helped me make sense of everything. What I didn't understand, that this spiritual awakening, all of this mental health stuff that was coming back, the addiction, the energy of addiction coming back into my life, was all coinciding with my hormones, with perimenopause, that I didn't even put together until a few years later, like literally just 2 years ago from now. So I was starting to, like, this energy was just bubbling up inside of me, and I was like, whoa. And there was a lot of sexual energy that was flowing through me, and it was feeling, again, very destabilizing. And, but it was also so fucking fun. And I guess from the outside world, it would appear that I was having some pretty significant mania. And I laugh because I can laugh about it now. I'm not I'm not manic, I'm magic. Just like I'm not psycho, I'm cyclical. So this is what, I was having some challenges in my relationship. There was a lot of sexual energy flowing in that area that was, very leaky sacral chakra energy. And all of a sudden, I had this massive spiritual awakening that lasted for months. It was incredible, the most blissful, beautiful, ecstatic experience, one of my top 3 that I've ever had, that also ended up landing me deep into the shadows where the lights went out. And this is when the shadow work really began for me. I was now studying core shamanism. I was really diving into journeying work, drum medicine, drums and rattles, which is the core, which is which is globally what core shamanism is. It's the entering altered states of consciousness through drums and rattles without the psychedelic plant medicine, which I ended up working with quite a lot to access these deeper parts of myself. But in the core shamanism, I was just getting really into these traditions and these practices and divination practices to uncover new parts of myself and really be in the body and bring myself out of the the really expanded spiritual realms and out of I learned a lot. I mean, this is a whole other thing. but the studies, like back to my studies, so I was continuing to study more deeply into different shamanic traditions, going deeper into myth and mythology and the Egyptian cosmology and the Egyptian pantheon of gods, goddesses, into Christ consciousness, Jesus specifically, Mary Magdalene, womb tradition. So all of this stuff is what I really started to study. And this is where the studies of Tantra really came back online for me, because of all of the trauma that was resurfacing around my sexuality, around sexual abuse. I was like, okay, like I'm ready to face it. I was barely ready to face it though. Again, because of my spiritual awakening really blew things open for me. My nervous system had not grown the capacity to really understand what I needed to face, and which is why I struggled so much and landed myself in a spiritual crisis. And so there was a lot of repair that needed to happen. I needed a lot of support at that time. And I was getting it from not only, I had an incredible psychologist I was working with. Actually, I had a team. I had a freaking team, and some healers that I had called in to help support this, because I knew that what I was experiencing was spiritual, and the medical community just didn't know how to navigate through psychiatry, how to handle these spiritual experiences that can become spiritual emergencies. And Stanislav Grof, who I ended up doing a couple programs like with his work, really helped me to identify that what I was experiencing, which I knew, but everybody else was telling me, labeling me with all kinds of other things. And so that became my deeper studies into Carl Jung's work and in the psyche. And I began to study Shaivism, which is a tantric path. And so this is the very classical form of Tantra, which then led me into the studies of Neo-Tantra or the Nouveau Tantra, which is more like the Western kind of perspective of sexuality and sensuality and relationship dynamics and consent culture and kink as kind of a way to heal, sexuality as a pathway to healing. And I just was like, yes, I need to heal these parts through my body and not through the psyche. So I was very much into the body at this point. And then I studied somatic trauma therapy healing. So soma, working with the body, understanding how the body and the nervous system traps our experiences, and then and how that informs the way we move through the world, how it informs has informed our attachment styles, the way we interact and engage with other people, with ourselves. And again, I had lived with so much deep shame around my sexuality. I was, there was a lot of self-loathing, and it was so internalized. My anger, my shame around the things that had happened to me, this victim mentality was just so internalized inside of my body that I was just so unwell. And as I started to discover these practices, I was able to really release so much from my body, and so much rage came through me, and so much sadness and grief and the full spectrum of human emotion. So after I studied the somatic trauma therapy, and I've been working with clients all this time. I was taking big, long breaks because I had to. And then as I would grow in capacity and as I would learn these new things, I was able to share with others. And I was able to reflect back to other people their own beauty and their own depth and their own healer within themselves, that they are, in fact, their own medicine. And so while I was sharing with others and mirroring to them their own intrinsic wisdom, they were mirroring back to me parts of myself that had maybe been unseen. And there was just so much reciprocity. And there just continues to be to this day in working with others, because it is a shared experience. And yes, I guide people. And yes, I can support their healing. And yes, I can impart wisdom or new perspectives to help them see themselves more clearly. But I am them and they are me. This is that oneness. This is that unity consciousness. This is the Christ consciousness. And so from there, I recognized that the majority of the healing I needed to do was really stuck in my nervous system and in my energy centers, which led me to study specifically childhood wounding and the trauma that lives in my body because of my childhood. And I just loved this work. The study was really deep. The personal healing that came from my studies was really deep and full of grief. And again, I had to really take my time with it and only touch into the spaces that I feel like I could go into with the capacity that I continued to grow. Because again, it's very, very deep work. It is an excavation of a lifetime. And not only this lifetime, as you get into it, you start to recognize what has been programmed into you, what is coming from your ancestral lineages, from the familial lineages, what has been programmed by society, by our cultures, and really having to dismantle everything that we have been told to be true. And so this was like a return to innocence. And this is part of, it sounds so deep and all this work, that I've done. And the experiences, like we all know what it's like to be human. Nobody is unscathed by the human spectrum of emotion and experiencing. And as we do this work, we have a deeper connection to spirit. We are able to see from a zoomed out perspective that everything is so divine. Everything is beautifully orchestrated. And we can move from a place of fate and victimhood into a place of destiny and radical responsibility and taking ownership for our lives and the way that we decide to live and heal. And it is a very, very disciplined path that requires your utmost devotion and the utmost care for your mental, emotional, and physical well-being, and the nurturing of your heart and patience and so much love and so much compassion and so much empathy, which really took me a long time to be able to feel for myself. And it's still a struggle. I have to constantly remind myself to be gentle with myself and to be gentle with other people and watch my projections. And so it's not all shadow. There has been so much fucking joy and bliss and pleasure and ecstasy in this experience, because this human experience is really tapping into our ecstatic nature and recognize that all of these emotions are really our being in our aliveness as a human, and that shaming an aspect of ourselves, and then the good and the bad, and seeing that polarity that we do see in this 3D experience, like that's real. This earth plane, these earthly bodies is very much rooted in the 3D, and then we've got this like time and space continuum that is another dimension that we move in between. And this gives us context to our lives. It gives us context to our past and witness the patterns that we've lived out so that we can kind of predict a future. But what I've really been able to drop into is that when we shift out of this and do our healing and out of that kind of space of victim, we can rewrite the stories of our past. we can view them as a gift. And I know how hard it is sometimes. First of all, how fucking hard it is to be a human. But then to see that the pain that we've lived through, that the world experiences, can actually be a gift and serve humanity and serve our highest self. When we can shift that, it's just, again, we shift our past. We change our DNA. We shift the energy that we walk around in that ripples out into the collective. Like, our healing is a gift not only to ourselves and to our children and to everyone around us and to, again, our deepest ancient lineages, but also to the collective pulse and what we are shifting into the future. Because right now we are at a precipice of great change and great expansion. And I know you are all feeling it alongside of me. It is profound. You know, this is something we are shifting from the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius, which is much more spiritual, much more expanded, and love is going to be the only way forward. Love for ourselves, love for humanity. There's so much to share on this. And so, to wrap it all up, that was a really long-winded bio and journey. I hope you're still here. And if you are still here, thank you so much for witnessing me. Because as you witness me, you are witnessing parts of yourself. You are witnessing love for yourself and feeling inspired to grow, to expand, to have more compassion, to have more love, to have more empathy. You know, and in these neo-tantric studies I shared, which was through the International School of Temple Arts, I really learned to see humans, like not just myself, but to see humanity, to see both men and women and everything in between at the rawest, realest, most authentic parts of themselves, and feel love for everyone's experience. Because again, we're all experiencing the same thing. Our stories might look different. You know, the reason for our pain might look different. The reason we grieve our losses or what never was or what will never be. Again, the stories are different, but the emotion is the same. And this is where we can come together and really touch into the human heart and feel that the cosmic heart really shine love down onto us. And I think there's been such a great divide between the masculine and feminine, as we're all feeling right now, especially like right now, given what's going on. And I have great trust that this is all happening as divinely as it possibly could, and to trust ourselves, to trust our wisdom, to trust in the greater divine plan, God's plan, however you want to say that. Because men and women need each other, you know, and the patriarch has truly, like, the original function of the patriarch was a really beautiful concept where the masculine could gently lead the feminine, and where the feminine's spiritual, sacred heart could nurture the masculine. And that's the dance. That is the dance of the divine. It's what we see in the perfection of nature. We see it. I don't believe that anybody chooses violence and war and hatred, but there is so much seething anger and rage and hatred and disgust that is happening on this earth, that I do not want to be a part of that. My body right now, as it is still healing from the surgery of this removal of the hardware and my weeping wounds, my body really moves energy through it. My wounds are weeping with the pain that the masculine has caused me in my life. And I could sit in the disgust and the pain and the hatred of all of that. But what is that going to serve? It will continue to perpetuate more of the same, and we can't be in this any longer. We just cannot. And I'm really feeling like I want to take a stance on loving the masculine from my highest, like the priestess Artemis in me. Because if I sit in the experience of my human self, of little, like my 3D Artemis in this body, it pains me greatly. It pains me to witness the harvesting of feminine energy on this planet. And I could, wallow in this pain, as I'm sure you could too. And I don't really know what to do. And the only thing that I feel like I can do is to stop perpetuating this pain. And I don't believe that, men are just as much a victim of the patriarch as we are women. And the only thing I feel like I can do at this point is to hold with the greatest love and compassion, healing, and for everyone involved at the hands of the patriarch gone awry. And I just love you all so much. And I guess to lighten this up at the end, I would like to invite us all back into our innocence at that time in our lives where we were just so in the mystery of life, where we would open up our eyes every day. And this isn't to take away from a childhood that was very, traumatic, difficult, but just even before all of that, like even in all of that, there was an innocence to us, a playfulness where we had no idea what the future from moment to moment would hold. We were just so authentic in our expressions. We were totally unmasked. We said the things we wanted to say. We ate the things. We moved around. We moved our bodies the way that spirit moved us, right? And so our nature truly is ecstatic. And to be in the blissfulness of our beingness and to live a life of sensual flow, to be in this sensory experience so that the divine may know itself through this innocence, through being open to the mystery and the magic. And, and really just being in our aliveness, whatever that looks like. And this is, it's such a beautiful thing to be here at this time because life is so short and it is fucking hard to be a human and it is fucking beautiful. And when we can recognize that this is the nature of this planet to ebb and flow between the light and shadow and find contentment and some neutrality with love and compassion always, I really do believe that things can change, that our experience can change, that our DNA can change, that we can find lightness in our being and truly come back to pleasure, come back to this freedom, come back to our playfulness and play again in this beautiful earth school and know that one day we will dissolve back into the light, back into this cosmic flow of love. And really, allow our hearts to lead us, allow our souls to lead us, allow ourselves to dance in the divinity that we are, and just really try to understand each other. So I really look forward to sharing more with you along my journey as now the midlife mystic, the alchemist and high priestess that I am, but I am still so fully human and I do not always get it right. but I fucking try. I really make the effort and dedication to this journey. And my life is so much more rich and beautiful and vibrant because of it. So may you continue to walk alongside one another in love, in the mystery, in the magic, in the wild, the sacred and divine of who you are. Satnam, I love you.